3 men were watching me. I smiled and left when my fiancé whispered, "Leave now," in the middle of the hall. I thought I was living the perfect life until that night when 3 strangers changed everything I believed about the man I was about to marry. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel in downtown Seattle buzzed with the kind of energy that only comes from mixing old money with new ambitions. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors, while the Pacific Northwest's elite mingled beneath gilded ceilings that had witnessed a century of celebrations. The air carried the scent of expensive perfume, aged whiskey, and the subtle tension that always accompanies high-stakes networking events. I adjusted the emerald silk dress that had cost me 3 months of savings, smoothing the fabric over my hips as I surveyed the room. At 38, I had learned to navigate these circles with practiced grace, even though I had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Tacoma where fancy meant eating at Olive Garden on birthdays. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight, I was here as more than just another pharmaceutical sales representative trying to make connections. I was here as the future wife of Dr. Marcus Whitmore, one of Seattle's most respected cardiac surgeons. Marcus stood near the bar, his silver-streaked hair catching the light as he gestured animatedly to a group of colleagues. Even from across the room, his presence commanded attention. Tall, distinguished, with the kind of confident posture that came from years of holding human hearts in his hands, he embodied everything I had never dared to dream I could have. When he had proposed 6 months ago on the deck of his lakefront home, overlooking Lake Washington as the sun set behind the Olympic Mountains, I had felt like Cinderella finally getting her happy ending. The charity gala for the Children's Heart Foundation was Marcus's idea. He served on the board, and tonight's event was expected to raise over $2 million for pediatric cardiac research. I had spent weeks preparing, studying guest lists, memorizing names and faces of potential donors. This was my chance to prove I belonged in his world, that I could be the partner he needed both personally and professionally. The orchestra began playing a soft jazz rendition of The Way You Look Tonight, as I made my way through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with familiar faces. Mrs. Pemberton, the pharmaceutical heiress whose foundation funded half the medical research in the state, complimented my dress. Dr. Richardson from Seattle Children's Hospital asked about our wedding plans. Senator Blake's wife inquired about my work with cardiac medication trials. Each conversation felt like a test I was determined to pass. But as the evening progressed, I began to notice them. 3 men, positioned strategically around the ballroom, their eyes following my every movement. They were not obvious about it. In fact, their surveillance was so subtle that at first I dismissed it as paranoia. The first man stood near the dessert table, tall and lean with prematurely gray hair, wearing a navy suit that looked expensive but not flashy. He would glance in my direction every few minutes, his gaze lingering just long enough to make me uncomfortable before returning to his conversation with other guests. The second man positioned himself by the large windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Shorter and stockier, with a square jaw and hands that suggested he worked with them for a living rather than pushing papers. His dark eyes tracked my movements with the precision of someone trained in observation. When I caught him looking, he would smile politely and turn away, but I could feel his attention returning moments later. The third man was the most unsettling. He lingered near the entrance as if guarding it, his black hair slicked back and his pale complexion making him stand out among the tanned faces of the country club set. There was something predatory in the way he watched, like a cat studying a bird it intended to catch. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched, focusing instead on the evening's purpose. The auction had begun, and Marcus was scheduled to speak about the Foundation's latest research initiatives. I found a spot near the stage, applauding as he took the microphone with the easy confidence that had first attracted me to him 3 years ago at a medical conference in Vancouver. Marcus spoke passionately about children born with congenital heart defects, about families facing impossible choices, about the hope that medical research could provide. His voice carried across the room with the authority of someone who had spent countless hours in operating rooms fighting to save young lives. The audience hung on his every word, and I felt that familiar surge of pride and love watching him command their attention. But even as I listened to the man I planned to marry, I remained acutely aware of the 3 watchers. They had not moved from their positions, and their focus had not wavered. The tall one by the dessert table had abandoned all pretense of mingling, his full attention now fixed on me. The stocky one by the windows had moved closer, positioning himself with a clear view of both me and the nearest exit. The pale one by the entrance had begun moving through the crowd, slowly but deliberately making his way in my direction. My heart began to race, but I forced myself to remain calm. These were likely just overly attentive guests, perhaps admirers or business contacts hoping for an introduction through Marcus. I was being irrational, letting my working-class insecurities manifest as suspicion. This was Marcus's world, and I was safe here. Marcus finished his speech to thunderous applause, and the auction resumed with renewed energy. A week at a Tuscan villa sold for $40,000. A private dinner prepared by a James Beard award-winning chef went for $15,000. The energy in the room was infectious, but I found it impossible to concentrate on the proceedings. The pale man had gotten closer, now standing just 2 tables away from me. Up close, I could see the intensity in his dark eyes, the way his jaw worked as if he were chewing on words he wanted to say. His suit was well-tailored, but there was something about him that did not fit with the refined atmosphere of the gala, something harder, more dangerous. I looked around for Marcus and spotted him near the stage, deep in conversation with Dr. Harrison, the head of pediatric cardiology at University of Washington Medical Center. They were discussing something serious, their heads bent together, hands gesturing as they spoke. Marcus's expression was troubled, more concerned than I had seen him all evening. The auction continued, but my attention was now completely focused on the 3 men. They had begun to move with more purpose, no longer content to simply observe. The tall one by the dessert table had started walking around the perimeter of the room, maintaining his distance but clearly changing position to keep me in sight. The stocky one by the windows had moved to the bar, where he could watch both me and the entrance. The pale one continued his slow approach, now close enough that I could smell his cologne, a heavy scent that reminded me of funeral flowers. I needed to find Marcus. Whatever was happening, I wanted to be near him. I began moving through the crowd, smiling and nodding at familiar faces while keeping track of the 3 watchers in my peripheral vision. They adjusted their positions accordingly, like players in some elaborate chess game where I was apparently the most important piece on the board. The ballroom seemed to have grown larger, the distance to Marcus stretching impossibly far. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I navigated between tables laden with silent auction items and clusters of guests engaged in animated conversation. The orchestra had switched to something more upbeat, but the music felt distant, muffled by the pounding of my own heartbeat. Dr. Patricia Sanchez, a colleague from my company who specialized in cardiovascular pharmaceuticals, intercepted me near the center of the room. She was flushed with excitement, her eyes bright with champagne and the thrill of the evening's success. "Sarah, you look absolutely stunning tonight," she said, grasping my arm with alcohol-loosened familiarity. "That dress is incredible. Marcus is so lucky to have found you." I managed to smile, but my eyes continued scanning the room. "Thank you, Patricia. It has been a wonderful evening. Have you seen the final numbers from the auction? We are well over $2.5 million. Marcus must be thrilled. This will fund the new research wing for at least 3 years." The pale man had moved closer still, now standing directly behind Patricia. I could see him over her shoulder, his dark eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. There was no pretense now, no attempt to blend in with the other guests. He was watching me with the focused attention of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. "Patricia," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need to find Marcus. Have you seen him recently?" She turned to look in the direction I was indicating, and for a moment, her expression changed. She had noticed the pale man too, and something in his demeanor had triggered the same instinctive alarm that I was feeling. "Sarah," she said quietly, her party mood evaporating. "Do you know that man?" Before I could answer, Marcus appeared at my side. His hand found the small of my back, warm and reassuring, but when I looked up at his face, I saw something that chilled me more than the stranger's stare. Marcus looked genuinely frightened. "We need to leave," he said quietly, his mouth close to my ear. "Now." "What is happening?" I whispered back, but he was already guiding me away from Patricia, away from the pale man, toward what I hoped would be safety. The 3 watchers had begun to converge. I could see them moving through the crowd with renewed purpose, no longer content to observe from a distance. The tall one had abandoned his position by the dessert table and was cutting through the crowd at an angle that would intercept our path to the main exit. The stocky one had left the bar and was moving along the far wall, his eyes never leaving us. The pale one had stepped around Patricia and was following directly behind us, close enough that I could hear his footsteps on the marble floor. Marcus steered me toward a side exit that led to the hotel's administrative offices, his hand firm but not painful on my back. His breathing had quickened, and I could feel the tension in his body as we moved. Whatever was happening, it was more serious than I had initially thought. "Marcus, you are scaring me," I said as we reached the door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." He looked back over his shoulder, and I followed his gaze. The 3 men had closed the distance considerably, and they were no longer making any attempt to appear casual. The pale one was less than 20 feet away, his face set in grim determination. The other two had positioned themselves to cut off our escape routes, their movements coordinated like a military operation. Marcus pushed open the door to the administrative corridor, a stark contrast to the opulent ballroom we were leaving behind. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on beige walls lined with office doors and fire safety notices. The carpeting was industrial grade, designed for function rather than beauty, and the air smelled of copy toner and cleaning supplies. "This way," Marcus said, pulling me down the corridor toward what I hoped was another exit. Our footsteps echoed in the narrow space, and I could hear the door we had just come through opening again behind us. "Marcus, please tell me what is going on," I demanded as we hurried past empty offices and darkened conference rooms. He glanced back again, and the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. "I cannot explain right now, Sarah. I just need you to trust me." The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of us, punctuated by doors that all appeared to be locked. Marcus tried several handles as we passed, but each one refused to turn. Behind us, I could hear multiple sets of footsteps now, moving with the same urgent pace that we were maintaining. We reached a T-intersection in the corridor, and Marcus paused for a moment, looking left and right as if trying to remember the hotel's layout. The fluorescent light directly above us flickered intermittently, creating a strobe effect that made everything feel surreal and nightmarish. "Left," he decided, and we turned down another corridor that looked identical to the one we had just traveled. More beige walls, more locked doors, more industrial carpeting that muffled our footsteps, but could not hide the sound of our pursuers. I was beginning to understand that this was not a case of mistaken identity or overzealous admirers. The three men were following us with a purpose that went beyond casual interest, and Marcus knew something about them that he was not sharing with me. The realization that the man I was planning to marry might be keeping dangerous secrets from me was almost as frightening as the immediate threat of our pursuers. We came to another door, this one marked emergency exit, and Marcus grabbed the handle with obvious relief. But when he pushed, nothing happened. The door was locked, secured with an electronic keycard system that required authorization we did not have. "Damn," he muttered, and for the first time since I had known him, I heard genuine panic in his voice. The footsteps behind us were getting closer, and I could hear voices now, low and urgent, speaking in what sounded like coordinated communication. These were not random hotel guests who had wandered into an administrative area by mistake. They were professionals, and they were hunting us. Marcus tried the next door we came to, and this time the handle turned. We found ourselves in a supply closet filled with industrial cleaning equipment and boxes of hotel amenities. It was a dead end, but Marcus pulled me inside anyway and closed the door behind us, plunging us into darkness that was broken only by a thin line of light from the corridor outside. "Turn off your phone," he whispered urgently. "What?" "Your phone. Turn it off. Now." I fumbled in my clutch purse, my hands shaking as I found my iPhone and powered it down. Marcus did the same with his device, and we stood in the darkness listening to the sound of our own breathing and the footsteps that were now very close to our hiding place. The closet smelled of ammonia and fabric softener, and the walls were lined with metal shelving that held bottles of cleaning solution and boxes of toilet paper. There was barely enough room for both of us, and I could feel Marcus's body pressed against mine as we tried to make ourselves as small as possible. The footsteps stopped directly outside our door. I held my breath, pressing my face against Marcus's chest and trying to slow my racing heartbeat. Through the thin line of light under the door, I could see shadows moving back and forth as the men searched the corridor. They were checking doors, trying handles, looking for us with the methodical thoroughness of experienced hunters. One of them spoke, his voice low but clear enough to understand. "They came this way. Check every door." Another voice, deeper and rougher, responded. "The exit is locked. They are still in this section." The third voice was the most chilling, calm, controlled, with the kind of quiet authority that suggested leadership. "Find them. We need to finish this tonight." "Finish what?" The question echoed in my mind as we cowered in the darkness, but I was too terrified to voice it aloud. Marcus's arm tightened around me, and I could feel his heart beating as rapidly as my own. The door handle to our closet rattled. I pressed my face harder against Marcus's chest, trying to disappear entirely into his embrace. The handle rattled again, more insistently this time, and I was certain that our hiding place had been discovered. But after a moment that felt like an eternity, the pressure on the handle released, and the shadow under the door moved away. We waited in the darkness for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The voices grew more distant as the three men continued their search in other parts of the corridor system. When Marcus finally judged it safe to move, he cracked the door open and peered out into the corridor. "I think they went toward the main lobby," he whispered. "We need to get out of here, but we cannot go back to the ballroom." "Marcus," I said, my voice barely audible even to myself. "Who are those men? What do they want?" He looked at me in the dim light filtering in from the corridor, and I saw something in his expression that I had never seen before. Not just fear, but guilt. The kind of guilt that comes from knowing you have put someone you love in danger. "I will explain everything," he said. "But first we need to get somewhere safe." We slipped out of the supply closet and began moving in the opposite direction from where we had heard the voices. This part of the hotel's administrative area was even more sterile than the corridors we had already navigated, with concrete floors and exposed pipes running along the ceiling. We were clearly in the building's mechanical areas now, far from the elegant public spaces where the charity gala continued without us. Marcus seemed to know where he was going, leading me through a maze of service corridors and maintenance areas with a confidence that suggested this was not his first time navigating the hotel's hidden spaces. The realization that he had prepared for this possibility, that he had scouted escape routes and backup plans, was almost as unsettling as the three men who were hunting us. We emerged into a parking garage through a service door that Marcus opened with a keycard he produced from his jacket pocket. The concrete space was dimly lit and filled with the expensive cars of gala attendees, their polished surfaces reflecting the harsh fluorescent lighting. The air was heavy with exhaust fumes and the echoing sound of ventilation systems. Marcus's BMW was parked in a corner spot, away from the main traffic flow of the garage. As we approached it, I noticed that he was constantly checking over his shoulder, scanning the shadows between the parked cars for any sign of pursuit. His paranoia was infectious, and I found myself jumping at every sound, every movement in my peripheral vision. He opened the passenger door for me, and as I settled into the leather seat, I realized that my hands were still shaking. The familiar scent of his cologne and the leather interior should have been comforting, but instead, they reminded me of how little I really knew about the man I was planning to marry. Marcus started the engine and backed out of the parking space with careful precision. As we drove toward the garage exit, I could see him checking the rearview mirror constantly, watching for headlights that might be following us. The exit ramp led to a side street that would take us away from the hotel and the three men who were presumably still searching for us inside. But as we approached the garage exit, Marcus suddenly hit the brakes. Blocking our path was a black sedan with tinted windows, positioned in such a way that we could not pass without scraping against the concrete walls of the exit ramp. The engine was running, and I could see the silhouette of a driver behind the wheel, but the windows were too dark to make out any details. "They found us," Marcus said quietly, and I heard the defeat in his voice. Behind us, I could see headlights in the side mirror as another vehicle entered the garage from the hotel side. We were trapped between two cars, with nowhere to run and no way to escape. The careful planning and cautious movement through the hotel had been for nothing. The three watchers had anticipated our escape route and positioned themselves accordingly. Marcus put the car in park and turned to face me. In the dim light of the parking garage, his face looked older than I had ever seen it, etched with lines of worry and regret that seemed to have appeared in the space of a single evening. "Sarah," he said, reaching for my hand, "I need you to know that whatever happens next, I love you. Everything I have done, I did to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I demanded, my fear finally giving way to anger. "Marcus, you owe me an explanation. Those men, this chase, your key card to the hotel service areas. What is going on?" Before he could answer, the passenger door of the sedan in front of us opened, and the pale man emerged. Up close, he looked even more menacing than he had in the ballroom, his dark suit fitting him like a uniform, and his movements precise and controlled. He approached our car with the confidence of someone who knew he held all the advantages. Marcus reached into his jacket, and for a moment, I thought he might be going for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out his cell phone, but before he could turn it on, the pale man rapped sharply on the driver's side window. "Step out of the car, Dr. Whitmore," the man said, his voice muffled by the glass but clearly audible. "Both of you." Marcus looked at me one more time, and I saw him mouth the words, "I am sorry," before he opened his door and stepped out into the garage. I had no choice but to follow, my legs unsteady as I emerged from the false security of the BMW. The stocky man from the ballroom appeared from behind a concrete pillar, and the tall one emerged from the sedan that had been blocking our rear exit. We were completely surrounded now, with no possibility of escape, and no one around to witness whatever these men had planned for us. The pale man stepped closer, and in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the garage, I could see his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than I had initially thought, probably in his early 40s, with sharp features and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. There was no malice in his expression, no anger or hatred. He looked like a man who was simply doing his job, which somehow made him even more frightening. "Dr. Whitmore," he said formally, "you have something that belongs to our organization. We would like to discuss its return." Marcus straightened to his full height, and I saw a flash of the commanding presence that made him such an effective surgeon. But it was a brittle confidence, undermined by the fear I could see in his eyes. "I do not know what you are talking about," he said. The pale man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I think you do. And I think your fiancé would be very interested to learn about your recent activities." He turned his attention to me, and I felt like a mouse being studied by a snake. "Miss Patterson, your future husband has been keeping secrets from you. Important secrets that put both of you in considerable danger. Do not involve her in this," Marcus said sharply. "She knows nothing about any of it." "Perhaps not," the pale man agreed. "But she is about to learn. Unless, of course, you would prefer to discuss this matter privately." Marcus looked at me, and I could see him weighing his options. Whatever these men wanted, whatever secrets he had been keeping, he was being forced to choose between his own safety and mine. The realization that I had become a liability, a weakness that could be exploited against him, was devastating. "Give us what we came for," the pale man continued, "and Miss Patterson can return to her normal life. Refuse, and she becomes part of a much larger and more dangerous situation." I found my voice at last. "What do you want from him?" The pale man studied me for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "Your fiancé has been conducting unauthorized research, Miss Patterson. Research that belongs to people who are not as patient or understanding as we are." "That is not true," Marcus said, but his protest lacked conviction. "Is it not?" The pale man reached into his jacket and produced a manila envelope. "Perhaps Miss Patterson would like to see the evidence for herself." He held out the envelope toward me, and I found myself reaching for it despite Marcus's sharp intake of breath. Inside were photographs, documents, and what appeared to be laboratory reports. The images showed Marcus in locations I did not recognize, meeting with people I had never seen before, handling equipment that looked expensive and sophisticated. But it was the letterhead on the documents that made my blood run cold. Meridian Pharmaceuticals, the company that had been shut down by the FDA 3 years ago for conducting illegal human trials on experimental cardiac drugs. The company whose executives had been indicted for conspiracy and fraud. The company that Marcus had sworn to me he had never been involved with. "You lied to me," I whispered, looking up from the photographs to meet his eyes. "Sarah, I can explain," Marcus started, but the pale man interrupted him. "There will be time for explanations later," he said. "Right now, we need the research data and the remaining samples. Turn them over, and this ends tonight." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between me and the 3 men who surrounded us. I could see him calculating, weighing options, trying to find a way out of the trap that his own actions had created. But there was no escape, no clever solution that would make this nightmare disappear. "The data is encrypted," he said finally. "Even if I gave it to you, you would not be able to access it. Then you will decrypt it for us," the pale man replied smoothly. "Tonight. And if I refuse?" The pale man's smile returned, cold and patient. "Then Miss Patterson learns exactly what kind of man she was planning to marry, and our organization pursues other methods of recovery." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. These men were professionals, and they had clearly done their research on both Marcus and me. They knew about our relationship, our wedding plans, probably our daily routines and the people we cared about. They had turned me into leverage, a tool to be used against the man I loved. Marcus seemed to deflate, the fight going out of him as he realized the hopelessness of our situation. "Where do you want to do this?" "There is a facility not far from here," the pale man said. "You will come with us, decrypt the data, and turn over the samples. Once we have verified everything is complete, you and Miss Patterson will be free to continue your lives." "And if the data is not what you expect?" Marcus asked. "Then we will have a much longer conversation about your recent activities." The stocky man opened the rear door of the black sedan, and it was clear that our evening of charity and celebration had come to an end. I looked back at the hotel, where the gala was presumably still in progress, where people were still bidding on auction items and writing checks for pediatric cardiac research. Less than 2 hours ago, I had been worried about making a good impression on Marcus's colleagues. Now I was being forced into a car by men who spoke in veiled threats and carried themselves like soldiers. Marcus took my hand as we walked toward the sedan, and I could feel him trembling slightly. Whatever research he had been conducting, whatever secrets he had been keeping, they had finally caught up with both of us. The perfect life I thought we were building together was revealing itself to be constructed on a foundation of lies and dangerous choices. As I settled into the leather seat of the sedan, watching the tall man slide behind the wheel, while the stocky one took the passenger seat, I realized that the three watchers had been planning this confrontation all evening. They had known we would be at the gala, had positioned themselves strategically, and had prepared for multiple contingencies. This was not a spontaneous encounter or a case of mistaken identity. This was a carefully orchestrated operation, and Marcus and I were the targets. The pale man sat next to Marcus in the back seat, close enough to ensure there would be no attempt at escape or resistance. As the sedan pulled out of the parking garage and into the Seattle night, I caught a glimpse of the hotel's elegant facade, its windows glowing with warm light and the promise of safety that now seemed impossibly distant. Whatever facility we were being taken to, whatever Marcus would be forced to reveal about his secret research, I knew that our lives had been irrevocably changed. The man I thought I knew, the future I thought we were building together, the safety and security I had believed we shared, all of it was dissolving into uncertainty and fear. The city lights blurred past the sedan's windows as we drove through the empty streets of downtown Seattle, heading toward an unknown destination and an uncertain fate. Behind us, the charity gala continued without us, the guests unaware that two of their number had vanished into the night, drawn into a world of corporate espionage and dangerous secrets that existed in the shadows of the respectable medical community they thought they knew. The facility turned out to be a nondescript office building in the South Lake Union District, the kind of glass and steel structure that housed dozens of tech startups and biotech companies. From the outside, it looked like any other corporate building in Seattle's fastest-growing neighborhood, complete with a modern lobby and security desk that appeared unmanned at this hour of the night. The pale man used a keycard to access the building, leading us through the empty lobby to an elevator that required another electronic authorization. As we rode up to the 15th floor, I studied the faces of our captors in the elevator's polished steel walls. They looked tired but alert, like people who had been working long hours on an important project that was finally nearing completion. The elevator opened onto a corridor lined with frosted glass doors bearing the names of various companies I had never heard of: Genomic Solutions, Advanced Therapeutics Research, Meridian Recovery Services. The last name made Marcus tense beside me, and I remembered the documents from the envelope, the connection to the defunct pharmaceutical company that had caused so much scandal 3 years ago. We were led to a suite at the end of the corridor, where the pale man used yet another keycard to grant us access. The space beyond was not what I had expected. Instead of offices or conference rooms, we entered what was clearly a sophisticated laboratory, complete with centrifuges, computer workstations, and equipment I could not identify, but that looked expensive and highly specialized. The lights came on automatically as we entered, revealing a space that was both sterile and cutting-edge. The walls were lined with locked cabinets and refrigeration units, while the center of the room was dominated by workstations equipped with high-end computers and analysis equipment. This was not some temporary setup or improvised facility. This was a permanent installation designed for serious research and development work. Dr. Elena Vasquez was waiting for us. I recognized her immediately from medical journals and pharmaceutical industry publications. Tall, elegant, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and wire-rimmed glasses that gave her an owlish appearance, she had been one of the most respected researchers in cardiac pharmacology before the Meridian scandal had destroyed her career. Seeing her here, in this clandestine laboratory, confirmed my growing suspicion that Marcus had become involved with people whose methods operated far outside the boundaries of legitimate medical research. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that I remembered was Portuguese, "I had hoped we could resolve this matter without involving your fiancé." "Elena," Marcus replied, and I could hear years of complicated history in the way he spoke her name. "You did not have to do it this way." "Did I not?" She approached us, her heels clicking on the polished concrete floor. "You have been avoiding my calls for 3 months. You missed our last 2 scheduled meetings. You have made it clear that you no longer wish to honor our agreement." "The agreement was based on research that proved to be too dangerous to continue," Marcus said. "You know what the preliminary trials showed. We cannot move forward with human testing." Dr. Vasquez smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That decision is not yours to make alone, Marcus. Too much has been invested in this project to abandon it based on your sudden attack of conscience. I looked between Marcus and Dr. Vasquez, trying to piece together the relationship that had led to this confrontation. It was clear that they had been collaborators, partners in research that had gone wrong or become too risky to continue through official channels. But something had changed Marcus's mind, had made him want to withdraw from whatever they had been working on together. What research? I asked, my voice cutting through their careful dance of accusation and justification. What have you been working on? Dr. Vasquez turned her attention to me, studying my face with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a specimen. Your fiancé has not told you about his groundbreaking work in cardiac regeneration therapy? How disappointing. I would have thought he would be proud of such innovative research. Cardiac regeneration? I looked at Marcus, but he was staring at the floor, unwilling to meet my eyes. The ability to regenerate damaged heart muscle tissue, Dr. Vasquez explained, moving to one of the workstations and activating a computer screen. Marcus developed a technique using modified stem cells and targeted genetic therapy that could potentially cure most forms of congenital heart disease. It could revolutionize treatment for the very children your charity gala was raising money to help tonight. The implications hit me immediately. If Marcus had developed a genuine cure for congenital heart defects, it would be worth billions of dollars and could save thousands of lives. But the fact that the research was being conducted in a secret laboratory by people connected to a discredited pharmaceutical company suggested that something had gone terribly wrong with the development process. The trials, Marcus said quietly, still not looking at me. The early human trials showed serious side effects. Aggressive cancers, organ failure, neurological damage. The treatment was killing more patients than it was saving. Temporary setbacks, Dr. Vasquez dismissed. Every revolutionary medical breakthrough involves risks. The patients who volunteered for the trials understood they were participating in experimental treatment. They were children, Marcus said, his voice rising with emotion. Sick children whose parents were desperate enough to try anything. And we were giving them a treatment we knew was flawed. We were giving them hope, Dr. Vasquez corrected. And we were gathering data that would eventually lead to a refined treatment protocol. Medical progress requires sacrifice, Marcus. You knew that when you agreed to join this project. I was beginning to understand the scope of what Marcus had become involved in, and why he had been trying to extract himself from the research. But I was also beginning to realize that his attempts to walk away had put both of us in serious danger. You said you wanted the research data and samples, I said to the pale man, who had been watching our conversation with patient interest. What happens after you get them? The research continues, Dr. Vasquez answered before he could respond. With or without Marcus's cooperation, but his involvement would make the process much more efficient. And if he refuses to cooperate? The pale man spoke for the first time since we had entered the laboratory. Then the research continues without him, and certain information about his previous involvement becomes public knowledge. Information that would end his medical career and likely result in criminal charges. The threat was clear. Marcus could continue working with them voluntarily, or they would destroy his reputation and his freedom. Either way, they would get what they wanted from his research, but his cooperation would determine whether he survived the process professionally and personally. Marcus walked to one of the workstations and sat down heavily in the chair. For the first time since I had known him, he looked defeated, overwhelmed by circumstances that had spiraled beyond his control. The confident surgeon who commanded respect in operating rooms around the world had been reduced to a man trapped by his own choices and the consequences of his ambition. The encryption key is a 48-character alphanumeric sequence, he said quietly. But even with the data, you will not be able to replicate the results without understanding the methodology, which is why your continued involvement would be preferable, Dr. Vasquez said, moving to stand behind him as he began typing on the computer keyboard. But not absolutely necessary. There are other researchers who could interpret your work, given sufficient time and resources. As Marcus worked to decrypt the research files, I found myself studying the laboratory more closely. The equipment was state-of-the-art, probably worth millions of dollars, and represented the kind of research capability that most universities and hospitals could never afford. This was not the work of desperate criminals operating on the margins of legitimate science. This was a sophisticated operation with substantial funding and professional expertise. The pale man seemed to read my thoughts. You are wondering how an operation like this could exist without attracting attention from regulatory authorities. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The answer is that regulatory authorities can be remarkably flexible when dealing with research that promises substantial returns on investment. especially when that research is conducted by respected professionals with impeccable credentials. He gestured toward Dr. Vasquez, who was monitoring Marcus's progress with the data decryption. Dr. Vasquez lost her position at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, but she retained her knowledge, her contacts, and her ambition. Our organization provided the resources necessary to continue her work under more flexible parameters. Your organization? Think of us as venture capitalists with a particular interest in medical research that operates outside traditional constraints. We fund projects that conventional institutions would consider too risky or too controversial, and we expect returns commensurate with that risk. I was beginning to understand that Marcus had not simply become involved with former colleagues conducting unauthorized research. He had become entangled with what amounted to a criminal enterprise that specialized in exploiting medical innovations for profit, regardless of the human cost. The computer workstation chimed softly, indicating that the decryption process was complete. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his face pale with exhaustion and stress. On the screen, I could see files and folders containing what appeared to be years of research data, laboratory results, and experimental protocols. Dr. Vasquez moved to examine the files, her eyes scanning the data with the rapid comprehension of an expert reviewing familiar material. After several minutes, she nodded with satisfaction. "The core research is all here," she announced. "Treatment protocols, genetic modification sequences, stem cell cultivation procedures. This represents the foundation for at least 5 years of continued development work." "And the physical samples?" the pale man asked. Marcus hesitated, and I could see him struggling with a decision that would determine our immediate future. The samples, whatever they were, represented his final bargaining chip in this negotiation. Once he turned them over, he would have nothing left to trade for our safety. "They are in a secure storage facility," he said finally. "Temperature-controlled, biometrically locked. I am the only person with access." "Where?" "The University of Washington Medical Center. Research Building 4, Sub-Level 2. Cryogenic Storage Unit 77 Alpha." Dr. Vasquez made notes on a tablet, recording the location information for future reference. "How many samples?" 47 vials of modified stem cell cultures, 32 tissue samples from successful regeneration protocols, and complete genetic sequencing data for 12 treatment variations. "Enough to resume human trials within 6 months," Dr. Vasquez observed with obvious satisfaction. The pale man checked his watch, a subtle indication that this phase of the operation was nearing completion. "Dr. Whitmore, you will accompany us to retrieve the samples. Once we have verified their authenticity and viability, our business arrangement will be concluded." "And then we are free to go?" I asked. "You are free to return to your lives," he confirmed, with the understanding that discretion regarding tonight's events would be in everyone's best interests. It was not quite a threat, but the implication was clear. Our silence about what we had witnessed would be expected, and probably enforced through methods I preferred not to contemplate. The ride to the University of Washington Medical Center took us through neighborhoods I knew well, past familiar landmarks that seemed surreal in the context of our current situation. The Space Needle gleamed in the distance, while Elliott Bay reflected the city lights like a mirror. This was the Seattle I had called home for 15 years, but tonight it felt like foreign territory, full of hidden dangers and secret conspiracies that operated beneath the surface of normal life. The medical center campus was largely deserted at this time of night, with only security personnel and essential medical staff maintaining the facilities. The pale man seemed to have credentials that would get us past campus security, but Marcus knew the building layout and access procedures that would get us to the storage facility undetected. Research Building 4 was a modern structure dedicated to advanced medical research, the kind of facility that represented Seattle's growing reputation as a center for biotechnology innovation. We entered through a service entrance that Marcus accessed with his faculty identification card, then took a freight elevator to the sub-level storage areas. The cryogenic storage facility was located in a restricted access zone that required additional authorization. Marcus used a biometric scanner that read his handprint, then entered a numeric code on a keypad that looked like it belonged in a bank vault. The heavy door opened with a soft hiss, revealing a chamber filled with rows of storage units that maintained samples at temperatures far below freezing. Unit 77 Alpha was located in the back corner of the facility, a self-contained storage system that could maintain biological samples for years without degradation. Marcus entered another access code, and the unit opened to reveal dozens of small vials arranged in numbered slots, each one containing what looked like a small amount of liquid or tissue. Dr. Vasquez examined several of the vials with a portable scanner she had brought for this purpose, verifying that the samples were authentic and properly preserved. Her expression grew more satisfied with each test, confirming that Marcus had not attempted to deceive them about the nature or quality of the stored materials. "Excellent," she announced after completing her inspection. "These samples represent at least 2 years of cultivation work. We can resume active research immediately." The pale man supervised the transfer of the vials to a specialized transport container designed to maintain the necessary temperature and environmental conditions. This was clearly not their first experience with recovering sensitive biological materials, and their efficiency suggested they had conducted similar operations before. As we prepared to leave the storage facility, I realized that this was the moment of maximum danger for Marcus and me. We had provided everything they wanted, which meant we were no longer useful to them but had become potential witnesses to their activities. The rational thing for them to do would be to ensure our permanent silence, regardless of any promises they had made about letting us go. But as we rode the elevator back to the main floor, the pale man surprised me by handing Marcus a business card. "If you change your mind about continued collaboration," he said, "Dr. Vasquez would be pleased to discuss terms for your re-involvement in the project. The financial compensation would be substantial, and the research facilities are significantly better than anything you could access through conventional channels." Marcus pocketed the card without looking at it, but I could see him considering the offer despite everything that had happened tonight. The temptation of unlimited research funding and freedom from regulatory oversight was clearly appealing to the scientist in him, even as the man in him recoiled from the human cost of such collaboration. We returned to the sedan for the drive back to downtown Seattle, but instead of returning to the hotel where this nightmare had begun, we were taken to a different location, the parking garage beneath Marcus's condominium building in Belltown. Our BMW was there, apparently retrieved by the stocky man, while we had been at the laboratory and medical center. "Your evening is concluded," the pale man said as we transferred from the sedan to Marcus's car. "I trust you will both reflect carefully on the events of tonight and make wise decisions about your future actions." Dr. Vasquez rolled down her window as they prepared to leave. "Marcus, you developed something truly revolutionary. Do not let conventional thinking prevent you from seeing its full potential. The children who could benefit from this treatment deserve better than your misplaced caution." Then they were gone, disappearing into the Seattle night as quickly and efficiently as they had appeared at the charity gala. Marcus and I sat in his BMW in the parking garage, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of his building, but feeling like we had returned from another world entirely. "Is it over?" I asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the concrete wall in front of us. "I do not know," he said finally. "People like that do not usually just walk away. They will expect me to keep quiet about what happened, and they will probably monitor our activities to make sure I do not try to expose their operation. And the research? Will they really be able to continue without you?" "Dr. Vasquez is brilliant," he admitted. "With the data and samples, she can probably replicate most of my work within a year. But she will make the same mistakes I made, rush to human trials before the treatment is safe. More children will die." The weight of that realization settled over both of us. Marcus had tried to do the right thing by withdrawing from research that was proving too dangerous, but his attempt to walk away had only resulted in putting the dangerous research back into the hands of people who cared more about profits than patient safety. We rode the elevator to his 19th floor condominium in silence, both of us lost in thought about the implications of what we had experienced. The familiar luxury of his home, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound, the carefully selected furniture and artwork, the kitchen where we had shared so many meals, felt surreal after the events of the evening. I poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle of Malbec we had been saving for a special occasion, while Marcus stood at the windows looking out at the city lights. In the reflection of the glass, I could see his face, and the expression there was one of a man grappling with choices that had no good outcomes. "Why did you get involved with them in the first place?" I asked. He turned away from the windows and sat down across from me, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion and regret. "The research was legitimate when it started. Dr. Vasquez approached me 3 years ago with preliminary data that suggested cardiac regeneration might be possible using modified stem cell therapy. The potential applications were incredible. Children born with heart defects could be completely cured rather than just managed. But something went wrong. The treatment worked too well. The modified stem cells did not just regenerate damaged heart tissue. They continued proliferating beyond what we could control. Patients developed aggressive cancers, organ failure, systemic breakdowns that killed them faster than their original conditions would have." He rubbed his face with both hands, and I could see the toll that keeping these secrets had taken on him. But Dr. Vasquez saw the failures as data points rather than tragedies. She wanted to continue with human trials, refining the treatment protocol through trial and error. She said the benefits to future patients justified the risks to current ones. And you disagreed. I disagreed with using children as test subjects for a treatment we knew was fundamentally flawed. But by then, I had already signed agreements, accepted funding, allowed my name to be associated with research that was operating outside normal ethical guidelines. I was beginning to understand the impossible position Marcus had found himself in. His desire to help sick children had led him to become involved with research that was ultimately harming the very patients he wanted to save, and his attempts to extract himself from the situation had only resulted in putting both of us in danger. "What happens now?" I asked. "I do not know," he admitted. "They have what they wanted, so they might leave us alone. But they also know that I could expose their operation, testify about the illegal human trials, provide evidence that could shut them down permanently." "Could you? Expose them, I mean?" Marcus considered the question, weighing the potential consequences of such action. "Possibly. But it would mean admitting my own involvement, facing criminal charges, losing my medical license. And there is no guarantee that law enforcement would be able to build a case against people who have been operating successfully in the shadows for years. And if you do nothing, then children continue to die in illegal medical experiments, while treatments that could save lives remain locked away in clandestine laboratories." We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us grappling with the moral complexities of a situation that offered no clear path forward. The man I had planned to marry had revealed himself to be someone far more complicated than I had imagined. Someone whose desire to do good had led him into morally ambiguous territory that threatened both our futures. But as I watched him struggle with these impossible choices, I realized that I still loved him. Not the idealized version of him I had created in my mind, but the flawed, complicated, genuinely caring man who had made mistakes in pursuit of something greater than himself. His involvement with the illegal research had been wrong, but his motivations had been pure, and his ultimate decision to withdraw had been the right one, even if it had come too late to prevent harm. "We could leave," I said finally. "Move somewhere else. Start over. Pretend tonight never happened." Marcus looked at me with surprise and gratitude, as if he had expected me to walk away from him after learning about his secrets. "You would do that? After everything you have learned about what I have done?" "You made mistakes," I said, "but you tried to correct them when you realized how dangerous the research had become. That has to count for something. And the children who might die because I could not stop the research from continuing? You cannot save everyone, Marcus. And destroying yourself will not bring back the patients who have already died." He reached across the table and took my hand, and for the first time since we had left the charity gala, I felt like we might survive this crisis together. The future we had planned would have to be different now, built on honesty about his past and acceptance of the consequences of his choices. But it was still a future worth fighting for. Outside the windows of the condominium, Seattle continued its nighttime existence, unaware of the drama that had played out in hotel corridors, secret laboratories, and cryogenic storage facilities. The charity gala had probably ended hours ago, with guests returning home satisfied with their contributions to pediatric cardiac research, unaware that the very doctor they had come to honor was struggling with the moral implications of research that operated far beyond the boundaries of their respectable world. As I prepared for bed, I found myself thinking about the 3 watchers who had changed our lives so dramatically in the space of a single evening. They had appeared at the gala like predators selecting their prey, pursued us through the hotel like hunters tracking wounded animals, and then vanished back into the shadows once they had obtained what they came for. But their presence would linger in our lives, a constant reminder that some secrets carry consequences that extend far beyond the people who keep them. Marcus fell asleep beside me, but I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the future we would have to rebuild together. The perfect life I had imagined was gone, replaced by something more complicated, but perhaps ultimately more honest. We would have to live with the knowledge of what he had done, the understanding that our happiness had been built on a foundation that included genuine tragedy and moral compromise. But we would live with it together, and that was more than I had dared to hope for when we were trapped in that parking garage, surrounded by people who spoke in veiled threats and carried themselves like soldiers in an undeclared war. The last thing I remembered before finally falling asleep was the sound of Marcus's breathing, steady and peaceful, the sound of a man who had finally stopped running from the consequences of his choices and was ready to face whatever came next. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions about how to move forward with our lives and our relationship. But tonight, We had survived. And sometimes, survival is the foundation upon which everything else is built.